Hello and welcome, everyone. I'd like to give you a warm greeting as you are all coming in. My name is Leanne Ladia, and I'm the Exhibitions and Program Manager at the David Ireland House at 500 Cap Street. And in a few minutes, the panel discussion will begin, titled Intent, a dialogue on values and the intersection of art and architecture. At 5 o'clock, which is about now, I'd like to introduce our director, Kate Malloy, and she will be welcoming us to the event.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you all for joining us. My name is Kate Malloy, and I am the director of the David Ireland House at 500 Cap Street. For those of you who are new to us, the David Ireland House is the historic home turned work of art created by the late pioneering conceptual artist, David Ireland. The house presents exhibitions and educational programs celebrating Ireland's artistic legacy and hosts collaborative events to strengthen San Francisco's cultural community. The David Ireland House is located in San Francisco's Mission District and is widely celebrated as one of the West Coast's finest examples of a home that's transformed into an environmental artwork. Tonight's program, Intent, a dialogue on the values and the intersection of art and architecture, is being co-presented by the David Ireland House in Centro Bahia in Havana. The conversation will tackle the delicate balance between conservation, renovation, and urban use in historic architectural spaces functioning as artistic sites. This dialogue is grounded by Felipe Delzade's mixed media installation, Centro 21. On view, a part of his exhibition, There's No Such Thing as a Perfect Circle at the David Ireland House. This exhibition was planned to be open through December 19th, but was forced to close to the public early once again due to the pandemic. A few notes before we get started. You can view Felipe Delzade's video work, Water Runs, for a limited time through December 19th by visiting our website, 500capstreet.org. In Water Runs, Delzade uncovers the history of Cuba's National Art School, which reflects utopian revolutionary exuberance. He gestures to reclaim the space by cleaning the gutters of the school and allowing water to run again, a symbolic action that evaluates an identity revitalized. Additionally, there is an accompanying catalog to Delzade's exhibition, There Is No Such Thing as a Perfect Circle, available to purchase for $10. Visit our website for more information on how to purchase this publication and to view his work, Water Runs. Our team will be sharing a resource guide in the chat box, which provides information on these programs and our speakers tonight. Some brief acknowledgements before we get started. I'd like to thank Niraj Bhatia, InfraStudio. A special thank you to Stephen Hughley, the team at Centro Bahia, Gretel Medina, Felipe Delzade, and to our team at the David Ireland House, including tonight, our team, Will Moncayo, Alex Emer, and Leanne Ladia. And finally, to our generous supporters, especially Carly Wilmans, Jock Reynolds, Jane Reed, and Ann Hatch, whose commitment to this organization is making tonight's program possible. You can make reservations to visit the David Ireland House by visiting our website. We are currently closed to the public due to the state's new pandemic restrictions and look forward to welcoming you back in person in the new year. After enjoying this evening's program, please consider making a donation. Your contribution makes it possible for us to continue to offer free admission and programming. Now, without further delay, I'm honored to introduce Niraj Bhatia, who will be co-moderating tonight's program. Niraj Bhatia is a licensed architect and urban designer whose work resides at the intersection of politics, infrastructure, and urbanism. He's an associate professor at the California College of the Arts, where he also co-directs the Urban Works Agency. Bhatia is the founder of the Open Workshop. Select distinctions include Architectural League Young Architects Prize and the 2019 Prix de Rome. Niraj, on to you.
Hi, thank you so much, Kate, and thank you to Kate and Leon for organizing tonight's event and making space for this critical conversation. Welcome to Intent, a dialogue on the values at the intersection of art and architecture. I'll be moderating tonight's event alongside Gretel Medina, who is an independent curator and art critic based in Havana. The etymology of the word intent dates back to the 13th century French word intent, which meant a goal, end, aim, or purpose. Intentions are not always disclosed in art, allowing for an openness of interpretation by the viewer. At the same time, by voicing an intent, it enables both a conversation and a critique of a piece of work. We're gathered online today in support of Felipe Dalzaida's exhibition, There is No Such Thing as a Perfect Circle, currently on view at the David Ireland House, but not visitable due to the pandemic. I had the pleasure of touring the show 2 weeks ago and highly recommend visiting it once it's safe to do so. Revealing one's intention is a vulnerable task, and I want to thank our amazing panelists today for joining us and sharing their work tonight. Tonight's program is a meeting of Havana and San Francisco, a meeting that we witnessed in Felipe's work as well. The panelists will be discussing projects of adaptive reuse and preservation, complex agendas that require clear intentions. Tonight's event will begin by a presentation by Stephen Hughley, followed by Felipe Dalzaidas, and finally InfraStudio. InfraStudio is an architecture and art studio founded in 2016 and directed by Anades Gonzalez and Fernando Martirina. Based in Havana, InfraStudio has developed an expanded practice of the discipline through the creation of concepts that take shape in architecture projects, urban investigation, works of art, and artist books. Felipe Dalzaidas studied drama at the Instituto Superior de Arte of Havana and received an MFA from the San Francisco Art Institute. A poetic and metaphoric sensibility underlies his practice, which includes single-channel videos, photography, drawings, and installation. His studio, located in the historic region of Regla, across the shore of Havana's Bay, is also a project space called Centro Bahia. Finally, Stephen Hughley has a distinct architectural background with experience in site-specific work, craft, and experimental use of construction materials. Stephen is a principal and studio director at Jensen Architects, a design-oriented architecture firm exploring innovative approaches in search of design solutions that are elegant, effective, and environmentally sensitive. Following the presentation, we'll have a moderated discussion and open up to the audience for questions. If you have any questions, please feel free to write them in the Q&A chat box. Thank you all for being here tonight, and I'd like to pass the floor to Stephen.
Thank you, Niraj. Appreciate the introduction, and thank you to the 500 Cap Street Foundation and Centro Bahia for sponsoring this event. This evening, I'm going to share with you a sampling of Jensen Architects' work focused on our cultural projects in and around the San Francisco and the Bay Area, with a deeper dive into David Ireland's house and the work that we have done there. But first, Jensen Architects is known for our diverse range of projects. We work on education projects, workplace, cultural projects, retail, and public space. Now, the David Ireland House is one of those unique opportunities where we can leverage this diverse experience on a single project. San Francisco MoMA Rooftop Sculpture Garden was a project that we transformed a garage into a sculpture and art display area that is both a meditative space within the San Francisco urban environment, but it's also a hub of activity for the cultural scene of the city. We also did a project further up north in Geyserville. It was a collaboration with Ann Hamilton. This sculpture takes the form of a tower that is on the interior, an abstract double helix that when programmed, in this case, a music venue, the audience and musicians occupy two different stairways, mix in the sort of three-dimensional volume. This was done for at Oliver's Ranch, who actually was the contractor that we collaborated with on David Ireland's home renovation. We did a project for Fort Mason Center where the task was to transform a former military base into a public-facing function. One of the spaces that we transformed was Gallery 308, a former division of several small spaces. We opened it up into a large multi-purpose space, and we were inspired by sort of an archaeological discovery that the ceiling at one point was painted this metallic silver that we rendered the entire ceiling and structure. Pardon me, this is a Minnesota Street Projects that we transformed a modest light industrial building into a gallerist art venue and public space for the area of Dogpatch within San Francisco. And finally here, just to cut this up, we also have a practice that does single family residence as well as multifamily. This is an example on Elmo Square, where we transformed this Victorian project into a new contemporary dwelling space and the use of these movable louvers, which kind of sets the stage for our work at David Ireland's house, which I'm going to give you a small sampling of what one can expect over there. It's going to fall short. I encourage you all to visit, to make an appointment and tour the facility when you get a chance after the shelter-in-place order is lifted. Now, David purchased this house in 1975. This is an image taken in and around, I think, the early 1900s. You can see the horse carriage out front. And one of his first tasks when approaching the house was to start to understand the spaces by drawing them. So he's operating as an architect in this case, doing a series of architectural floor plans as he sets up his initial interventions, which largely took the form of subtraction. So here he is removing the window mullions, door frames, and such to expose the wall planes and floor planes in their raw and undisturbed state. He was interested in making his mark while not being visible. So almost acting as an archaeological as he's peeling off the multiple layers of wallpaper and such. Here he says when he removed the floor molding, the wall was able to finally break free of the floor and act as a type of fresco. But this was also a space where David staged his art pieces. So while the house itself serves as a sort of a three-dimensional inhabitable sculpture, he situated his individual pieces on a rotating basis and curated those in a changing order. So he would invite guests on a limited basis to come tour the house and see his installations while still dwelling in the home. For him, the house was a palimpsest of the centuries of inhabitation. He was interested in exposing these marks, highlighting them and having them tell a deeper story of inhabitation. But our story begins actually not in the house, but under the house. Here's an image of David Ireland after he's carved away a portion of the basement. For it was our first intervention was to carve away the bottom of the basement to insert a archive space that would house David's collection for the new 500 Cap Street Foundation, a nonprofit that supports the work of David Ireland, and transformed this formerly admittedly difficult place to get a tour of that's now open to the public. It also features a new flex space, a multi-purpose space that we inserted on the street level. Early image of getting underneath the house. Here's a construction photo. We approached this much like one approaches building a tunnel, where segments were installed around the perimeter piece by piece, and the excavation kind of worked its way around the perimeter. And then when we were finished, it was a fully supported structure while not disturbing the dwelling up above. On the outside, it's very limited presence of our intervention here at the street level. A single garage is visible that, when the doors open, is an open invitation to the public to come into this multi-purpose space that has revolving exhibition in it. In this case, this is the inaugural exhibition of David's architectural drawings of the house. And then finally, upstairs, our biggest compliment here is our hand was not seen. The cracks remain cracks. We didn't add any new cracks up there. Our intervention was down below to support this wonderful space that David created that is now open for tours. Currently on display, as has been mentioned, Felipe Delzados has his installation, There's No Such Thing as a Perfect Circle. And that's where our stories actually crossed. It was shortly before the exhibit was meant to open that I got a call from the 500 Cap Street Foundation looking for a model repair person, as this model that represents Central Bahia was injured during transit. I leapt at the chance to repair it myself rather than pass it on as just a gesture of goodwill to Cuba, to an artist that at that point I have not met. But at this point, I am absolutely thrilled to hand it over to Felipe, who's going to share more with you about his Central Bahia intervention. Felipe?
Okay. Thank you very much, Stephen. Thank you for fixing the model. It was, I remember how damaged it was when I arrived to San Francisco. It was on my luggage from Havana to stopping in Miami and then to San Francisco. Kind of like the same journey I did when I lived in the United States. First I was in Miami and then in San Francisco. Okay, we are seeing now the images. This is the logo of the project, which is the shape of the bay. And it contains in that shape CBR. And then, which is Centro Bahia en Regla. And here you see the map of the bay, very early map. And this is why the city of Havana exists. It's a relationship city and port, a unique relationship and exchange that create and develop the city. So, and it's because of the quality of the bay that the entrance is very narrow, and then there is a big opening inside. Next. We can follow the next image. All right. This is an entrance photo, a recent photo to the entrance of the bay. And in that red dot that you see there is where Centro Bahia is. And in that red dot is where we are right now. This just give you an idea of that the position of Centro Bahia is really the center, the bay center. So we play with a sense of humor with this idea of being at the center of the bay. This is, can we go to the image of the building, how I found it? I found, I found this place walking with a friend of mine. Hello. the image again. Well, I found this house, which is in a corner, walking with a friend of mine that I actually met in San Francisco. It's an artist from Germany called Hans Winkler. And we were walking, doing a project that had to do with the city. And I was looking for a place for a studio. And when we saw this corner and the view, and we saw through the window, and we saw there was an entire space. So it was a long process to get it, but this is the way how it was. Okay, so this is a full plan of how it was. This was a house where an old guy lived. And so we have all of these walls and rooms that were additions. They were not really from the construction itself. It was something that were done during the period of times. So one of the first things that we did was to get rid of all of these walls that were artificial walls, just for a domestic use, so that we could get this very big. You can see on the right, the full plan, how is it now, right? After, let's say, liberating the space, okay? And suddenly we have a view of what I got. It was a 80 square meter space with a 6 meter tall ceiling, which is a very flexible space. There is a great space for gatherings. They vary from video screenings, installations, academic exchanges, for me to work. But in the process of remodeling, fixing the place, we start like taking out the layers on the wall, and we found walls that are from the 1700s. So very, very old walls for Havana, from the beginning of the city of Havana. And this is an image from the same time of the walls, okay? When the port was a very busy port, due that and this is in the colonial times, free market was allowed in the port. So this and in the city. So this is what this change of merchandise and the port to be the port where the necessary stop between Spain and America is what make the city of Havana to be prosperous. All right. Okay. In the process of working with the walls, we found cracks that we didn't let them expose. Very opposite to David, that left all the cracks, because these were very important cracks that needed to be taken care. Let's continue. And let's say that the process of remodelation of this space, I did it without contractor and without any support, all right, of any institution or anything. This is just with the money from the sales of my work. And so I had to learn a lot, actually, about construction and being a contractor. Can we go to the image in the back? Yeah. Thank you. And so to work with these walls, we work with a limestone powder and limestone powder and sand. It's a very old method, okay? And I found the workers walking on the street of old Havana, where there is a lot of remodeling work done by the local government there. So I would, for example, I found these guys working in a church, and I approached them and say, hey, I have a place in a studio across the bay. Can you help me out? This is how I was getting all the workers, and also help from, I didn't study architecture. So the knowledge and all the sort of like tips of how to do these interventions were done with the help of friend of mine from in the field of architecture. Okay, let's continue. This is an image of a church that is pretty much near, very near, and very important church for Cuba. It's actually the church that originated this part of town, because it's a church of the sailors. For when the sailors did the long trip from Spain, from Europe to Havana, they, you know, in these conditions, they did these trips, they needed to thanks. They made it safe. So this church now is very important for the Cuban spiritual cosmology, because the Cubans travels a lot, and everybody that is going to travel go before and light a candle in this church. So this is a very visited location. You see the church on the left, and on the square is Centro Bahia. Let's continue. And this is also another image very close, and you see in the square where Centro Bahia is, and on the right, huge industrial abandoned area. And this is a lot what is going on in the area. There is a lot of abandoned industrial areas without use. So the potential for this area for a transformation in the future is huge. Let's continue. Okay, this is an image from the 1800s, from the same area where my studio is located, and you could see that there was a very busy port in the Spanish time. Okay, so sort of like a warehouse where seafood and all of this. Okay. So this is a little bit the story of it. Okay, this is the space when it was clean. All right, and let's do the next one, and the same angle of how it is now. All right, so we sort of like kept all the bricks exposed. We found these beautiful bricks, and we painted the doors green. I think definitely Stephen was saying that and it was through the entire process of working on this project, which took me about 5 years. I really was the inspiration of David, and the visit that I did to his house was super important and a big inspiration to do this project. Let's continue. We have a map now of 1898 when the cruise ship of battle cruise ship, U.S. battle cruise ship exploded. Very much this happened in front of where Centro Bahia is. And so this image actually could be seen from Centro Bahia more than a century ago, which is the end of the colonial time and the beginning of the American and new colonial time for Cuba. Okay, so I wanted just to show some images of how the history of Cuba is so connected to the Bay. All right, let's continue. And this is now in 2017, when Obama's time and the cruise ships start to come in. So suddenly these big boats arrive, and you can see they are the size of a lighthouse. So they totally change the view of the bay and the perception of the view. And they brought business and tourism. And that happened for like, I think 2015, 2014, 2015, till 2018, till Trump ended up the arrival of cruise ships. Okay, and so there is an image of how it was before and how it is now. For me, it was very important. I was the outside without repair, just to blend in, because the area is really beautiful, but it really is abandoned, and authorities really are not doing anything about it. So I decided to really fix it, even fix it the sidewalk, something that David did too. You can see on the bottom, on the image on the top, that the sidewalk is broken. This is how I found it, and I fixed it. So the idea to fix the facade of the building is to give also a message in the area, that this is how things should be done in the area, the remodelation, the conservation, because this is an historical building. This is an image from the inside, okay? Let's continue. Another one? Another image? Hello? Yeah, these are the doors through the office, and installing this glass door that I bought in an antique place, we broke the glass. So another sort of like a coincidence with David. I guess David sent me this accident, and now this broken glass is right there. Let's continue. That's the entrance to the office. And this is how you see Centro Bahia at night, which is really beautiful. The events here, and we've been doing events already for like 4 years. Okay, this is the floor plan at the beginning and the floor plan now, and on the yellow area is where we're going to do the next work. We haven't done it yet, but this is a project that I'm developing with an architect, Reynaldo Parra, that is actually in Merida, and we have been working for really for 3 or 4 years on this to come to this solution. First, concrete is super expensive in Cuba. So $40 right now in the black market, a bag of concrete. So, and there is no Home Depot, such a thing like that. So the proposal is to do this with containers. And this whole construction is all well. All right, it's all well in. It's 2 floors with a terrace. This terrace we have a beautiful view to the bay as a gathering space, as a social space, and on the bottom some office, a room for artists and residents to stay, and then a little garden, okay, a little patio. And this is a very important thing is when you walk outside the street, you don't see what is going on inside, because actually next to where this construction is, this building continues. So this is an intervention that is completely invisible from the sidewalk. Thank you very much. And I'm going now to present my guests. I met them about 3 or 4 years ago, and I've been following all the projects with a lot of enthusiasm. Last year, we were part of the same exhibition program at the Ludwig Foundation. I did a show before them, and then I went to the show, and it was a really beautiful show. And we have a fantastic dialogue. It's a small community here in Havana, but a very united community, and I look forward to introduce them to the audience in San Francisco and so on. Thank you.
So thank you, Felipe. My name is Fernando, and also want to thank 500 Cap Street, and also Bahia, and all the people who is have been working for so long in this project. And we just want to share like really fast the project we have been working for the last 5 years. It's called Linea 508, which is in Vedado. So you can switch to the next slide. Is it working? Oh, okay. So this is let's hopefully in a year it will open, but it will be a contemporary art center in the middle of the cultural area of Havana, which is Vedado, which is where you can find all the theaters and all the cinemas and the art galleries. So you can change. Next one. And so this program is injected in this in a building from 1888, which is one of the first buildings built in this site. And also you can see the differences from the beginning. This is a picture taken in the 30s. And then this is a picture taken 5 years ago, which is, there's a complete different urban condition, like a periphery of the city. And now it's the main whole building. Next one.
¿Ya está?
So, yeah.
Estoy hablando.
Okay, so inside this building, we find really unique things. One is that this more than a century of use of this domestic space leads to a really singular and really specific space, which is it came out from a really generic domestic typology. And also it's important or really interesting when we found out that David Ireland 500 Cap Street, it's also kind of the same. So it's like a typical house that during the let's say several actions and also the use of this space, it totally changed into a really site-specific space. And what we were trying to achieve in this project, on the right side, you see a picture taken like 10 years ago. It's trying not to lose this atmosphere that it's related with time. No? Next one. And what we find inside this house is two kinds of luxuries. One was luxury of space, so it's like most of the spaces are 6 meters high, but also the luxury of time, because every material is has lead to a kind of a new skin of this container. Continue the next one. So in current condition, we have been taking out just what it was needed to take out. So the process of construction and also the design approach, it's been like really pragmatic. We have only take out the roof, which needed to be done. But then the walls will remain like they are now. So we are not restoring anything. We're not replacing anything. We're not using even painting in this project. So the art that will be exposed here, it will be in a curatorial point of view, it will be super site specific, and it will be we'll have this process of adapting to this building. And we also decided not to take out any wall. So we are having, in terms of galleries, like really small spaces for exhibiting, but that was a decision taken from the early process of design. Next one. Possible, sometimes what I was saying is just like not restoring and also not doing typical things that you just do, but you don't know basically why. So it's another sense of comfort what we're trying to achieve in this space, and also structure accidents you can find here. So we are trying to achieve this identity that it's so pragmatic, but also so cheap at the same time, which is a nice coincidence. And in this picture, you see that we don't have any other treatment than the one you are seeing here. So of course, we'll take out all the trash you see over here, but it will be complete. And so the scale of the building, it's basically the luxury that we will be enjoying. Next one. Also here, you see some of splashes, so some accidents from the melting the reinforced concrete, and we love this kind of accidents that appear here. Also the humidity that you see in the wall. So we, of course, we'll do some high-tech actions just to erase a little the humidity, but also it's a space that it will not be able to exhibit every kind of work. So I don't think when we were talking with the galleries, they say, okay, we cannot exhibit a Picasso here. We can only exhibit like works that can survive these conditions. And that's really interesting for us because it's how can you do kind of a curatorship from the beginning of the construction and design process. So next one.
Well, I'm gonna present what was the commission for us. We were commissioned to add new square meters to this house, which seems to be perfect for us because it's not only about the house, but the relation with the void that surrounds it, with the gardens. And we were demanded to create spaces for artist residences in the courtyard. Next one. So the strategy that we developed, it was a landscape strategy that for us would not change the existing conditions, but make them stronger and to put more effort in that what existed before architecture. Next one. So what we did, it was to mimic the existing walls of the perimeter of the house. I mean, redefining the limits of the plots. Of course, this building had to be cheap because we had a very little budget, and of course, it needs to be simple to build, as we don't have wide material diversity or a very good working hand. Next one. So we developed this conceptual strategy, and this is what we get in plan. These walls that are parallel to the perimeter of the house, very simple concrete block wall. And then inside of it, you have 4 rooms that would be ventilated and be accessed by courtyards, interior courtyards. Then in the back part of the existing house, which was the more vulnerable one because of the advanced state of abandonment, we intervened with creating offices, bathrooms, and staircase for accessing to the roof top, and it remains exactly the same, open for as a space for exhibitions. Next one. So what you get once you go out to the courtyard, it was the same impression that you had before, like nothing is changed, and you cannot see the new building as a contemporary architecture that's competing with the existing one, but only a garden intervention, and you have like these rough concrete walls with hidden doors. Next one. Where you can have a subtle perception of there is something there, but it's not actually being shown in the landscape of the house. Next one. But once you go to the inside, you have like, again, this very simple materiality with only one material. It is almost because of the pink color that we choose and the 4-meter height of the existing rooms of the house that inspire us. And this is the actual contemporary intervention that you perceive once you are inside it. So that is our presentation.
Yeah.
You can hear me?
We can hear you.
Here, okay. So, well, hi, I'm girl from Havana. I'm with these guys, and I could see a thing that kind of connects these three projects, and I would love to our panelists to talk a little bit about it. I know we are against the clock here, but I could feel as a curator that every project that we are talking about today comes out from a place of independence. Is this artist that feels at some point that they were kind of incarcerated in their own projects and in their own houses, and they wanted to go outside and experiment. So that in Havana today is actually an issue with capital letters. Because, well, you know, our history, and then right now we are in a process of transformation of our society, which is, of course, a very, very bumpy road. So these projects that are presented here today are actually one of the few that are trying to change the landscape of our art and cultural scene in general, and also the practice of art in general. As an artist, but as a curator or as a mediator, and in this case also as architects. So I would love to have their perspective of the panelists of how their experience the independence with the duty or the desire to create these art and architectural projects. Felipe, can you give us your insights on this?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
All right. I was thinking in that word, in the independence, in relationship to freedom, right? Creative freedom. I cannot even think of a better use of my studio than to be an open and flexible space where all kind of issues could be addressed and discussed. Plus, for me, it's very important that the individual, the audience that comes, it has a particular kind of experience that has to do with an aesthetic experience, an experience that has to do with something that expands their knowledge and their views on life. I think this is very important in the area where I am, which is an area that is a peninsula that is actually not easy to get to it. So it's a little bit isolated, and the local community here is isolated. And as I mentioned, there is a lot of neglectment, and Regla needs a lot. The neighborhood needs a lot to be done here. And so to be in this location, in a way, is a commitment with the history, a history that I have been discovering as I've been placed here, right? Because you start researching about the Bay, you also build alliances with with the local authorities that deals with the renovation of the port, which I have that sort of like a coalition with them to do an event actually next year with Plan Maestro. And so it really is also about building community, building a network.
Looks like Felipe may have froze. I wonder if InfraStudio might want to pick up with their views in Havana.
Yes, well, for us, it's kind of a special situation as well, because architecture actually independent Cuba since the change from the capitalism to the 59. So in architecture became like in the commission, only commissioned by the state. But since like 7 years ago, maybe important changes have been occurring in Cuban economy that allow the appearance of private galleries or independent businesses in the small scale. So that allowed demand that was followed by the appearance of small studios of architecture and designers that gather in a spontaneous way, I mean, in a non-legal way. And that's the way that we've been acting in the last years. It, in one hand, gives you the freedom of not being controlled or not being under load, or for us, we started our studio as we were students, so everyone can be an architect. But on the other hand, as everyone can be an architect, architects have been disappeared from society. And of course, when we are gathering as a group and we are trying to get this legal recognition from the government as independence in that way, but public works of the city, and that it's wanted to change the city in the scales we are doing. I've been told this to Shopee. I don't know if there's something you want me to clarify more.
I think what I got from it was choppy. What I heard from there is that the way of commissioning architecture has changed radically, and it's enabled and empowered a lot of smaller and younger studios to come up. And you know, I guess Gretel, you being there in Havana,
Yeah,
curious if seems like part of Gretel's question is the autonomy of the institution to have a kind of political voice or position, you know, which it sounds like Felipe, as he describes his project, you know, as he just said, one of the kind of main things he's looking for is to have a space that's free for people to express their voice and, you know, not be open in that process. And maybe you can just speak to that kind of question of, you know, the autonomy of being able to have a voice in a project and speak freely and design freely and so forth.
Yeah, actually, that was more or less the idea. Because now all these projects have to kind of carve their way into the art scene, which has been very central. We are used to go to exhibitions on special spaces that they are white cubes and they don't have differential programs. So now with these new projects, we are, in the case of Felipe, for example, connecting with, you know, a program with the work of one artist, and then in the other ones we are trying to experiment a new space with characteristics, features that are different and not white at all, and also all the layers of history that these guys are going to have to deal with. Not only the history of the neighborhoods that they are intervening, but also the history of the houses, of the buildings, and then the history of the new owners, which are, in this case, all artists or intellectuals, that they have their own aesthetic and their own goals on cultural matters. So I think it's a challenging, but also very exciting panorama. I don't know, Neeraj, if you want to ask the group something more related to the structural challenges.
Yeah, maybe I'll pass this to you, Stephen, and maybe InfraStudio, if you can hear me, you can also respond, and maybe cutting out your video will allow the audio to go a bit smoother. I'm interested that, you know, in adaptive reuse projects, there's always questions around preservation, and the act of preservation entails forms of evaluation and judgment, where there's a judgment of a moment when things were, say, more valuable than another moment, and whichever way you want to kind of define value. And in these various projects, and also, you know, including the David Ireland House, you know, renovation and adaptive reuse project, there's always this complex play in revealing these layers of history within the architecture. And this obviously also entails questions around power and the construction of the narrative, which narratives will be preserved, which ones will vanish. And I think what's really provocative and amazing about the work of these artists and designers is this embracing of uncertainty. So giving this kind of unstable reading of history, which I feel like echoes Ireland's pieces, such as "The Safe Gets Away for the Second Time," which for those of you who don't know is, you know, a dent in one of the walls in the David Ireland house, which has been marked with a plaque. And it's really to kind of speak about this kind of instability of history and what we choose to value and not value. So I guess I'm curious about some of the decisions in these projects where questions of history and particularly problematizing the instability of history are brought to the fore as an act of design.
Yeah, well, that was absolutely foremost in the working with the House of David Ireland is understanding the layers of history, which ones to leave as is, and where we were free to make an intervention. For us, it was a very clear line. Anything above a certain datum above was strictly preserved. In fact, we worked with a historic preservationist who stabilized the interior. You can't see their hand, to their credit, but the preservationist was very much there and active while we were down below and had a certain amount of autonomy and freedom to work at that level. Now, working in San Francisco, often we're entering a sort of a site, a three-dimensional site that's already established, an existing building, for instance. Some of them are historic, like David Ireland's house, and also like Fort Mason Center, while others, like Minnesota Street Projects, it's not a historic building, but in many ways we approach it the same way, which is to say, we're always very clear about having clarity between what is found and existing and what is the hand of the architect, and having some amount of clarity, contrast between those two worlds. We find that creates a richer dialogue between these two worlds, while also respecting the history of those buildings. Now, Grell mentioned the all too often white box that art is presented in. While a neutral background is often a sort of a supporting feature of art display, there is certainly room for more dynamic environments that play a more active role. And we find often that there's room for both types of art display, that of sort of a neutral background versus a very sort of participatory texture like you find in David Ireland's house and Central Bahia and Linea 508.
That sounds great, Stephen. And I see that we have Felipe back in InfraStudio back. And I don't know if you caught my question, but it was really a question around preservation. And in the act of preservation, there's choices and judgment that are always put forward about what histories to keep and which ones to mask over. And I see this a lot in David Ireland's work as well. And I see in both the projects presented, Felipe, your project, which seems to be an amazing art space, and InfraStudio, the project that you're currently working on, there's this embracing of the instability of history, that there's not just one reading, there's not one privileged moment, that this is an evolving act of preservation. And so I'm just curious how you may have problematized the instability of history and what kind of choices you made along the way, or maybe one or two examples where you really try to problematize this question of the instability of historical readings.
Hello.
Yes, please, Felipe.
All right. Well, I am in Gretel's computer. My computer has problems. It's, as you mentioned, it's a process. It's a process-based project, and you learn by doing it. In my case, it's a matter of sensibility, of respect, and there is a judgment that you do on the fly, in the sense that it's what really makes sense, because you are saving something that needs to be saved, protected, restored, and in this case was to bring the entire space, right? This is the original space, and then to stabilize everything. The problem in Cuba really is the limitation with the materials and with the is really a headache to do this kind of endeavor because one day there is something and then 2 days later there is not. And as I mentioned before, I think I mentioned this, a lot of the materials actually and constructions are bought through the black market. There is no store to purchase materials, all right? So it's a challenge. But in my case that I did not study architecture, but I have, I did a project about the art schools in Cuba, and I was very close to the 3 architects that did the art schools in Cuba. Very, very close to them. So I learned a lot through that personal relationship. The way how I learned going to David Ireland house, I remember one evening I went, he invited me and another mentor, very important for me, Tony Labat, for dinner. And I think this personal experience inform a lot. They are part of your background, of your approach. And so you walking in a territory that is unknown, but you have that sense of what you want to achieve, you know, and what you want to get done. And so I think that's the beauty that I don't know what it would be the end of this project. Now we have a plan with that other area that we're going to build with the containers. But we see how that will be done, you know. It depends. Let's see. But it really is a lot of a matter of judgment and to be conscious that you need to rescue a space to save it, to protect it, and then to put it into function. So there is this balance that you have to find.
Yeah, InfraStudio, I'm curious in your project that you're working on, because it seems like there's been a lot of conscious attempts. The floor is yours, InfraStudio.
Let's hope the signal helps us to talk a little, at least this time. So it's important to understand that this building we're working on, it's the first level of preservation of heritage. So there are certain laws that forbid us to do certain things, but there's nothing that tell us what we should do. So there's a theory and there's a whole historical center with a certain approach. And we just wanted to do 2 things. One is to introduce this new volume that we knew from the really beginning that it will never win the fight, or let's say be as good as the old one. So we just wanted to, the competition was about disappearing contemporary architecture. So that was one thing of the eraser of the gesture of architecture itself in a kind of artifice. So in a kind of a landscape strategy. But talking about the building itself, what we just wanted to do is to erase any kind of theory or any kind of academic approach and just be led by intuition. And intuition is full of mistakes, full of error. And what we just wanted is to get away from every kind of path we knew before. And then it leads us to a really pragmatic and kind of naked way to build, which is also the cheapest way.
Yeah, so in a way, the pathology itself of the house dictate the actions of design, and we try to not add more than that, just to orchestrate it in the cleanest way possible, and to lead the house to the states of living, of habitating, habitating space.
So it's like, how can you erase nostalgia, but not erase the spatial experience. So talking about since the beginning.
Oh, that's fascinating.
And we still don't know. It's a really open process full of mistakes and uncertainty.
Yeah, no, and I think that's what's so powerful about the work is the self-conscious acknowledgement of uncertainty in these projects, and sometimes, in fact, embedding that uncertainty into the final product. I see Gretel, you're back. I also want to give you, Gretel, an opportunity. If you have another question, by all means, please jump in. I have several, so if not, I can keep going, but I wanted to give you an opportunity. And for anyone in the audience that has any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of Zoom.
So I'm really interested in how these art projects are thinking they are future art projects, you know? How is the relationship between the venue and all the things that you plan for the venue, and then the future art projects? Because art is changing, as we know. So in the past 30 years, art is kind of melting into real life. And I think these new buildings, new venues that we are seeing are part of that. So I'm interested in know how the kind of the responsibles for these art projects are assuming that. You got me?
Yeah, I think I understand the question. If I could try to interpret the question again, you tell me if I'm getting close to what you're getting at here, which is, as the designer, we can't predict what type of artwork will be installed in these spaces 2, 3, 20 years from now, because art is always evolving. As part of the thrill of creating spaces for the display of art is that type of uncertainty. And while one can't predict, one can install a series of tools and have space that is proportional, that at least doesn't preclude the evolution of art display to happen. So the first thought I have is you need spaces that are just flexible by nature, that they're not hyper articulated in such a way that it would preclude other uses, other inhabitation from happening. So, you know, you think about any one of the projects I presented earlier, whether it be an industrial warehouse or a former army base or a home, in David Ireland's case, like, no one fathomed that any of these spaces would be used for art display, but yet they work. And why is that? I think quite a bit of it has to do with interlacing the right type of infrastructure. So the way art is evolving, you've got to be able to light it. You got to be able to power it, an AV component. You got to be able to modulate natural light. And so having these layers of supported infrastructure, I think, is very, very critical to art display. But I think in the end, artists are flexible. And when they are commissioned to install artwork in a space that maybe is more challenging than the neutral white box, they often respond with wonderful interventions that are colored by the constraints of that space. So in a lot of ways, this dialogue, while you can't anticipate it, happens down the road, and you just need to make sure that you're setting up a situation where you're not precluding different interpretations to happen down the road.
Thank you, Stephen. And maybe just before InfraStudio and Felipe jump in, because I think we can piggyback one of the questions that just came in through the Q&A. There's both the uncertainty that Gretel mentioned in terms of where art is going and how to create spaces for the art, but then there's also the uncertainty of construction in Havana. And it seems like there's a question in the Q&A about the supply chain and how your aesthetic theory, can accommodate this uncertainty. And this is from Lisa Sullivan. Thank you, Lisa, for your question. Saying, I'm also impressed with the young Cuban architect's approach to preservation, which seems to be an inflection to the special conditions of Cuba. So seems like there's a huge amount of intelligence in the front end of design, dealing with uncertainty of things you can't predict in the construction process and materiality. And then, of course, as things are constructed, the uncertainty of where art is going and how display might work.
Well, regarding Gretel's question, we were actually talking about that in the presentation because it's a very important issue in this project. We think in this case middle terms are worthless. We of course had the question of what to do with this house. One of the galleries from a gallery in Barcelona, Noguera Tronxat, which is like the typical white cube. So their collection is somehow been adapted and conditioned by that space. And of course, one of the first impressions that we had, it was like, okay, we should paint everything, maybe blocks and doors to add more exhibition space. But we ended to understanding that the condition of the house and the beauty of the house is over that. So everyone that is curating or exhibiting in this space would have to act as a site-specific exhibition. It doesn't matter if it's not or if it's in the future. The works of art will have to dialogue with the space in a very specific way. So that would be different with other art spaces, and somehow it would tribute to the aesthetic of the house and the past and present of the house that it's showing right now.
So it's true that architecture should be a kind of infrastructure. I totally agree with that. But also I think architecture should solve small problems and should create big problems. And I think there's a lot of good examples of buildings that are putting on the table a new problematic space that has also changed art. So in terms of architecture as a container of art, I think there should not be just let's say comfortable relation, but also architecture should be a problem in itself, not just a problem solver. But talking about uncertainty in a context like Cuba, I think there are different approaches, and we have one approach, but there's another architects that which are doing incredible things. But we think vision should never be a justification of something, and so we do the resources and also the format should change the discourse. For us, we are not interested, for example, in fixed buildings. We are not interested in materials. We are not interested in let's say, more tangible things, because of the uncertainty. And that's why we are obsessed with conceptual ideas. We are obsessed with spaces, but also strategies. And this project we are showing here, and all the spatial strategies, they can change during the process. So they can change material, they can change structure. But we think, or at least maybe we're kind of naive, that our discourse or our ambitions should not be changed by a certain condition. We should just have this, read the in-between line, like a strong idea that can survive any, let's say, fight or any harsh condition.
That's a great response, and it sounds like an emerging aesthetic theory as well. That comes from this idea of doing a very simple action and getting a big result from it, and that through the simplicity and power of that idea can hold in and of itself a lot of contingency for factors that can't be anticipated along the design and construction process. Felipe, I see you're back on the grid. I don't know if you wanted to add anything there in terms of, we just have a few minutes, but if you wanted to add anything about, either the uncertainty around construction as you start embracing that, the renovation, or uncertainty. I'm just going to ask you to unmute yourself here, Felipe.
Yes, I did.
Perfect.
Yes, definitely. Well, the two things that we definitely have in common is that it have to do with the context of Cuba, that you really have to embrace uncertainty. That is something that I also learned with, I studied art at the San Francisco Art Institute and I graduated. If you are in this profession, you really have to embrace uncertainty. So this is, to be an artist, you do it. And I think that's the beauty of it. And I see this as a positive thing. It could be stressful for many, but this territory that is uncertain give a lot of space and a lot of opportunities. I think in other places are very difficult to find. So the decision of being in Cuba actually these days and to have a studio here and to be part of what is going on here is a very conscious decision, right? And that completely is transform our work and our practice. It's so related to the site where we are, to the context where we are, and totally the context. I always have thought that the context shapes the work, you know, and the output really. In this case, I lived for many years in the United States and I returned to Cuba. And it really was about embracing the context and embracing and the context I always knew that was very uncertain. So, but it's part of it. There is a lot of, everybody operates in that uncertainty, a lot of improvisation happen, you know, and that is a lot of material that I feel, that I research and that I use in my work.
Fantastic. I think we all have so many more questions for all of you and the extraordinary work you're doing, but I want to pass the floor to Gretel for a couple closing remarks before we sign off tonight.
Okay, so for wrap up, I think that we have heard here very interesting concepts and everything. It seems to me that it's a little bit about the future, and the future, it seems to create a mix between programs and organizations and dialogues, but at the same time with spontaneity and improvisation and also a very respectful way to look at history. And that strikes me as a very good role to follow. And I could see that in David Ireland and 500 Cap Street Experience. Also, they are following that in Linea 503. And of course, Felipe is doing that with these 16 amazing plays. Note for everyone that is seeing us, we are like jumping from every screen to every screen because of the challenges of being in Cuba. So sorry for that. But at the same time, I want everyone to know that we are all in the same place. We are at Centro Bahia in Regla. So these walls that are behind me, behind Felipe, and behind Infra are from 16th century. So yes, it's more or less what I wanted to say, is that I see like an exciting future. I see a lot of connections and dialogues between every cultural agent. So we are not now curators or artists or institutions or architects. We are all part of the narrative of our societies and the cultural way that our societies find their explanations and their roots into the future. So that is what excites me. And I think we have a lot to still talk about, a lot to dialogue, and a lot to experiment. Maybe we can do that when all these magnificent projects are completely finished. So thank you all for having us all here, and thank you also for the patience with the bumpy technology. And yeah, I hope you like it, and I hope you enjoy, and we were happy to be part of this. And we can answer any doubts that you may have in the future in our social networks and our mails and everything. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all. And good night, everyone.
A warm thank you to all our participants from Havana and locally right here in San Francisco. Thank you so much to all of our attendees for joining tonight. We will also be sending a link of this recording and the program resource guide with a follow-up email. So wait for that in your mailbox in 24 hours. Thank you all for joining us, and I hope you have a pleasant evening ahead. Good night.